This very familiar parable of the talents we hear today, we always need to remember, as sometimes we've heard various homilies, how talents refer to our talents, our gifts. But a talent in the scripture that we hear today in the gospel is roughly equivalent to a year's wage, not an insignificant amount of money. And so the three servants, given this really large amount of money, five years' wages, 2 years' wages, and 1 year's wage, are given custody, given control of this portion of the master's wealth to do something with it. He doesn't even seem to offer them any advice, just giving it to them. But as his servants, and knowing him as we hear, as this demanding servant that he is, they realize what they need to do. Now, in this parable, obviously it plays out that the two make this risky investment. It's risky in that they go out and they double their money. You don't double your money by playing it safe. And yet the wicked servant does nothing. Christ uses this example, this parable of investment and risk and return as a model for the spiritual life. It's a parable. As with all the parables, it's a story he tells to try to teach us something, some lesson. He's not trying to teach us investment advice. He's trying to teach us how to get to heaven. And then the moral of the story, God is a giver. And we have to learn how to give in order to have God. It seems contradictory to our very understanding of the world around us, just as the very parable itself. The man who seems to play it safe is scolded and condemned as wicked and lazy. Indeed, it is a paradox. The more we give, the more we have. We can't just take and hoard. We must receive everything we get from God and be willing to give it away. If we cling to things, they will fade away. They will disappear from our midst. The one who has divine life knows how to give and therefore to grow. The one who has received from God is able to spread that wealth of the divine life. The one who doesn't have tries to cling to the remnants, tries to cling to their false hopes, their false beliefs, and ends up losing all. For us, if we say that we are good enough, and if we cling to this faith in our whatever, that it's good enough, that I'm good enough, that what I'm doing is okay, even though I don't believe everything, then our faith is already dead. If we apply this to our own lives, we can apply it in several different ways. In the area of evangelization, our faith will grow in as much as we are willing to share it. If we keep the faith bottled up, if we keep the faith quiet and under wraps, we aren't going to grow any more than anybody else around us. But if we begin to teach and preach and proclaim the gospel, not only are people around us going to benefit, but we too are going to expand our horizons. We too are going to learn more as we delve deeper and have to explain and understand for ourselves the mysteries of the faith. Our first reading today from Proverbs mentioned the relationship of husband and wife. Marriage grows as much as The spouses are willing to give to each other, to give to their family. If either spouse hoards and tries to bury themselves, they bury their marriage. This applies to all aspects of life. Hoard and bury and you will fail. You might have many talents buried in many different fields, but you'll be afraid like the wicked and lazy servant who risked nothing and lost it all. Walking the path of discipleship and stewardship, aka the way of Christ, means taking risks, taking this great gift of faith and sharing it with others, taking the gifts that God is giving you and being willing to risk it all without counting the cost, trusting without being afraid. In the midst of the Cold War, with the talk of mutual nuclear destruction, all the buzz in the air and great fear throughout the world, a relatively unknown Polish bishop walked out onto the loggia of St. Peter's, having just been elected the Pope by the College of Cardinals, and said to the world, "Be not afraid. Be not afraid." This past week, we celebrated 25 years since the fall of the Berlin Wall and the Iron Curtain that was torn apart. It took men of great faith, great trust, like Pope John Paul, like President Reagan, like Margaret Thatcher, and many, many others, to go all in, to stand up for what was good, for what was right in the face of evil, to not sit back and bury their heads in the sand. We, in our lives, need to tear down the walls that pen in our fears and keep us from being able to take the risk that is necessary to gain everything. I know it's not easy. It's so tempting to crawl back into that hole or behind that wall and to hide out and to not deal with the issues in our lives. I'm a sinner too. I know how this works. But I also know that if I look up from my hole, I can see the hand of God reaching down to me, looking to pull me up, pull me out of that hole that I dug in my own selfishness, in my own fear. If only I'm willing to extend my hand and allow Him to pull me out, to trust in Him. Be not afraid. Fear is a tool of the enemy, the father of lies, to keep us head down in the sand, fearful of what lies above. Fear is paralyzing and will only lead to destruction. So be not afraid, but let trust in God alone lead you. Nourished by His sacraments, nourished within His church, allow yourself to receive all that He has to offer you by giving Him everything you have to offer, which at your core is in your heart, your love. When I was in seminary, I learned a prayer that I've quoted often and seems to sum up everything perfectly. Fall in love with Christ, and it will change everything. Fall out of love with Him, and it will change everything. St. Paul reminds the Thessalonians and us today that Christ is coming. And this is the theme that we're going to hear for the next several weeks. He will come again. It's not just a matter of if, but when. And St. Paul says, let us stay sober and alert, on guard, ready. In other words, get our heads out of the sand, trust in Jesus, and grow rich in the bounty of the Lord. Christ's message to us is, be not afraid. For if we trust in him, place our hearts, our love, our devotion in him and him alone, we will gain all things, including eternity, which is the only thing that matters.